Well, hello there. I hope you're doing well. Today I'm drinking another one of my decafs. It's in the afternoon, so want to make sure I don't stay up too late. But this morning I did have a really delicious Onyx coffee from Colombia, from Aponte Village. It's just this really light, sweet, delicious coffee. So today what we're going to be discussing, I guess you could say, is an extension of my Luddite video, where I talked about the blood in the machine at Babel, which I think makes sense considering that this book was the first of these books was recommended by Brian Merchant, the author of Blood in the Machine. And Blood in the Machine is more of a history book about technology and innovation, which is closer to Shock of the Old, which is a favorite of one of my books. This one, which is called Techno Negative, A Long History of Refusing the Machine, written by Thomas Dijkster, is more of a philosophical investigation of the reasons why people refuse the machine. This book was published in March of 2026, and the second book we're going to discuss is called The Infinite Alphabet by Cesar Hidalgo. This is a kind of a follow-up to his book called The Why Information Grows, which was a bit of an academic text. This is a bit more like mainstream. It's a little bit easier to understand and is still about economic complexities and how knowledge grows, but it's in a much more digestible format. Techno Negative was a very short text. It was about 110 pages and followed by almost as many pages of citations, which isn't uncommon in nonfiction, but for such a short text, it was kind of surprising. It follows the history starting during ancient Greece with the interaction of leaders in technology and the working class in technology. When I say leaders, I mean leaders in terms of both military, civic, or educational. Aristotle and Plato both believed that using technology called techne would lessen a person and make them less human, while doing thinking like philosophy was the pinnacle of human existence and human thought. Civic leaders, emperors, or senators believed technology was a path towards revolt. Roman emperors banned or broke machines that would have put a number of people out of work. This isn't to say there was no machines made during this time. There are plenty of machines, including like the water screw, the lever, the pulley, and one part Archimedes, who invented the water screw for irrigation, defended one of the cities he lived in from invasion. He created significant weapons of war during that time, and they were both automated or mechanical. But as soon as the war was over, he destroyed them, including all records of how to make them, because he thought that this lessened man in general at that time. I wouldn't have been surprised if one of these weapons was a catapult, considering he made levers, and catapults are essentially just levers. Once we move past that in towards the medieval time, it becomes more of a religious argument against technology. The arguments of Plato and Aristotle were lost during this time, but still rulers needed to keep reinforcement. I mean, this was the time of serfs, and so they wanted the workers to be able to feed themselves. And the best way to do that, of course, is to have them do subsistence farming and then tax whatever remains over that. And if you have mechanization, then you have people who don't need to be working the land constantly to make sure that it's providing them sufficient food. The church was making arguments around the spiritual risk of idle hands and the devil being in the machine. This argument isn't dead either. In the early 2000s, you'd hear arguments about RFIDs being the mark of the beast, because there was a movement in Silicon Valley, of course, to get RFIDs underneath your skin. to have that be a mechanism for opening your house or paying for credit cards. And really religious folks were like, the mark of the beast, that's how you have to pay for things. So it's really not not gone away. It just changed and become subsumed into a subset of our society rather than being the driving force of our society. You could also look at things like COVID vaccines and 5G as being similarly demonized because they have controls or they implant little tiny computers into your arm. Machines were being made during this period, but various rulers of cities or city-states, be it a mayor, cardinal, or king, they would murder a lot of these inventors. Like they would just straight up murder them. In a German city, a loom was burned at the stake as if it was witchcraft. And people watched it, cheered as it destroyed, and the inventor had been strangled into sleep. The risk from automated looms was such that there needed to be a multiple approach to destroying it. One semi-religious with burning it at the stake, and one being coming at it from a power of the state which was used to kill people. It wasn't until we're past feudal stages and deep into mercantilism that we start to see a change in the way that people think about technology. As I discussed in my video about the Gutenberg parentheses, this is when the printing press came about. So right now we're talking about from Greece to the medieval times and now to the 1500s, there was a big pressure against technology in a variety of different ways. It would lessen men. It was destroyed because the devil was in it. And it's now whenever the technology was impacting only scribes and that it became a tool for religion that the printing press was kind of allowed to thrive in Europe. I say all this is generally Eurocentric. I just want to be clear. The author does kind of call this out because some of these things were created in China beforehand, but this author doesn't focus in on Asia or other parts of the world. He kind of focuses on the Western tradition of technology, Ludditism, and all the various mechanisms that are relevant now for people who are saying that they're refusing AI and things like that. Some of the cities, of course, the printing press was destroyed, but the fact that it was embraced by church leaders, especially the Lutheran Church, because this was part of the Protestant Reformation, that really was part of what kept it alive. And Kessler makes the argument that the state changed the outlook on technology as there were major philosophical changes. Capitalism grew out of mercantilism, and Adam Smith published the theory of the invisible hand in the 1950s. This opened a different perspective on the understanding of cost, profit, and the value of things. You suddenly are encouraged to manage costs and to maximize profit, whereas that was not a desirable thing to really do beyond collecting taxes. To some extent, using machines became the natural outgrowth of slavery. Enslaved people had been an otherized group of people by pseudoscience like phrenology and race science. Kessler calls this onticide, or the ontological murder or homicide of a person or groups of people. Ontology is the study of being, your existence. It's just how people live in the world. If someone is experiencing onticide, they are no longer being a human. So it's the human condition is studying the human condition is ontology, and if you are being ontologically murdered, you are no longer being treated as a human. And in the cases of slaves, they're described as animals. And if you think about why people were upset about Trump calling people vermin and rodents and animals and things like that, this is why. It's a way of otherizing them and dehumanizing somebody. It is a type of onticide. Onticide is a required first step for genocide, because if you want to do ethnic cleansing or clear a group of people, you need to make that entire group of people no longer human. You need to make them something else. So you need to kill them before you kill them, in terms of like ontologically. So this is a major reason why we need to be resistant to that type of language, because it is a step towards genocide. And some folks call that stochastic terrorism, because you're using words and language to otherize and kill people before you kill them. Since most of the work in the UK was done by craftsmen, the Crown found the benefit for mechanization as a tool of oppression, and found benefit for the efficiency of manufacturing as beneficial for itself. So this is when a state would use mechanization as a tool of oppression, such as you control the way people work. In a lot of ways, this is what people call Taylorism, which is or Fordism. It's the way that people were controlled in assembly lines, especially that Ford ran. This is an early version of this, where you can break the power of a group of people, the guilds, by forcing these lower skilled workers and lower wages on people, and force them to work extremely long hours, and undercut them by having children working at the same places too. And at this time, this is when we see common people pick up the torch to become machine breakers. It's gone from, philosophically to religiously to, leaders generally against it, to now the common people fighting against it because it is bad for them, and they are the only people who can look out for themselves. I was thinking about this a little bit more too. There were other changes during these time periods. There was professionalizations of militaries. There was growing a balance between local power, individual power, and the power of the state in ways that didn't exist before. And I mean this from a state apparatus perspective, like the bureaucracy has really grown. In terms of feudalism, the crown wasn't exactly able to exert direct control over individuals very easily. They had a direct control over the nobles, who directed control over another noble, who directed control over the serfs. And the serfs could uprise or stop a war. But now, with a professionalization of both militaries and police forces, there's a lot more direct interface that the government had a force that it controlled on its own without having to rely on calling up other people that it could send to shoot and put down this sort of uprising. Things are different in 1810 when the Luddite revolt breaks out. First of all, there are cannons, muskets, tactics designed around city sieges. Don't forget, this is 20 years after the U.S. rebellion. So there was all that experience gained from fighting the U.S. against the U.S. Revolution, ongoing efforts in India to control people there. It was during the War of 1812, so there was a lot of city controlling tactics and populace controlling tactics that were in place that were being imported back from the colonies of England that were being turned against the people of England in a way that was novel at the time. According to Blood in the Machine, there were more soldiers fighting in the English Midlands, where the Luddite revolt occurred, than there were in India. I think the distance that people were fighting at, musket or rifle range, did help to keep people from identifying each other, so that if you knew the person or you were from that area where these machine breakers were coming from, it'd be a lot harder to identify them when you're at musket range or cannon range. And I think that really helped with dehumanizing the Luddites in a meaningful way. Since this was a time after a lot of these wars, there were a number of veterans that were fighting on the side of the Luddites, so they were pretty successful in their own right. The military was aided by draconian machine breaking laws that allowed sheriffs to hang anyone that destroyed a machine. And I think this logic has extended as time has progressed. The state uses economic tools as a major tool of repressing its own people and controlling people. It's the preferred tool of war right now too. Like the sanctions that were in place on Iran beforehand, and really when Trump invaded and attacked Iran used an economic tool against us. They used a blockade to prevent oil from getting out of the Strait of Hormuz. And that was a very strong economic tool of war. It was so powerful that Trump basically conceded on Friday the 19th about this. That's how powerful economic tools can be in warfare. Even whenever it's a completely unbalanced war where the U.S. should have dominated, we got our asses kicked because of the economic portions of these things. One of the things that I really found interesting in the book is there's a subtext that the Industrial Revolution could have happened in Greece or Rome, but there was a state interest in that not happening. There wasn't anything special about England compared to Greece from an engineering perspective. Sure, science was a bit backwards, with the four elements and all that sort of stuff. But that was because of prevailing technologies at a time. Really understanding the world understands Techno and getting out and building and breaking things. If you're only in the world of thought, you can only think about things as far as you can see and touch. By denigrating the physical workers who probably had good mechanical understanding of how things could be built and why, it kept the lower class as a class to be looked down on. And it prevented those tools from being used to free them, to give them time to allow for an overthrow of the state. England, on the other hand, had already had multiple revolutions, philosophical revolutions, political revolutions in this time, to include mercantilism and capitalism, which broke historical norms around the goals of a state. And of course, it was no longer a monarchy. It had gone through a number, the Magna Carta happened in the 1200s. There was a series of civil wars, even in a period of time where there was without a crown. So there was a lot of political upheaval that the state would want to try and control people more and allow the capitalist class to become a buffer between them and the working people. There are a number of people, books, speculative fiction out there about what would have happened if Rome never fell. Well, we know from this book that Rome chose to stay in a particular state of technology. Whether that would have been true forever or not, we of course don't know. But I think that Rome destroyed attempts to move into more modern manufacturing, even modern as in the 1800s, because there's evidence of it. I think that Rome would have stayed the same for a significant period of time unless there was a significant political shift, which there absolutely could have been. I mean, Rome went from a republic to an empire, and then it went from Roman religious beliefs to Christian, in a 600-year period. So of course something else could have changed, and in some ways, the Western version of the Roman Empire did go through all these changes. But I think that Rome itself would have needed to have a significant philosophical change. The second book, The Infinite Alphabet, is a book that focuses on the evolution of knowledge and technology. In a way, this book is looking at the technological progress as a positive. Hidalgo tries to explain how knowledge grows in relationship to technology, distance, and technological relatedness. Hidalgo is a physicist turned economist. He's very interested in networks that are formed in knowledge generation. He's one of the first people that looked at the how you could plot the relationship between products and their distance within a trade network. So what this means is you have a series of trade, and on the one hand you have semiconductors, and on the other hand you have mining, and those are pretty far from each other. And if you have a culture that's focused on mineral extraction, it is very difficult to get the semiconductors, because that grew out of the chemistry industries and the fabrication industries, and not an extraction industry. So those end up being, you end up exporting the extracted minerals, and you end up importing the semiconductors and the chemicals and things like that. So he was trying to understand if there was an overall linkage between how far apart these products were in knowledge or whatever. For example, he plots China's export of products over 3 periods of time. He shows how products move from essentially a low-tech manufacturing into high-tech, and it's not an immediate direct step from textiles to semiconductors, but because textiles lead to dyes, you can go from dyes to other chemical manufacturing to semiconductors. So there's a line that can get you there, but there's a lot of other things that need to happen too to get you there, and which I think is pretty interesting. Hidalgo defines 3 different laws of knowledge generation. The first is the law of learning and forgetting. Essentially, every technology and manufacturing process offers an opportunity to learn, and this is where continuous improvement mechanisms in a company come into helping improve the behavior of, and continuing to reinforce what they know about that technology. But eventually you come to horizons of growth and learning, and it peters out as operational excellence is reached. Similarly, if someone doesn't use that knowledge, there's a pretty steep knowledge drop off at 3 to 6% per month. That means by the time that within a year, you've forgotten about 75% of what you knew. So I mean, if you're a coder, think about how quickly you go back and look at code that you wrote before, and you're just like, how the hell did I write this? You're like, this person, whoever wrote this, was a fucking idiot. There's no comments, nothing makes sense, and then you look and you're the person who did it. That's what this is about. You got into that context, you really understood it, you learned how to really manipulate things in a way that was useful, and then as soon as you move on to something else, you just memory dumped it all. The way that knowledge accumulates, though, is by connecting these learning curves together. Essentially, as technology reaches a limit of what it's capable of doing, a secondary related technology is able to be investigated and continue to move on. These are like interrelated S-curves, and this is kind of the theory of evolutionary innovation, where you can find things along a certain mountain pass, and then you have to try and hop to another mountain to try and see if you can get to a greater height, because you might get stuck at a local peak, but then have to go down into some valley to get to a higher local peak. And the second law is around the mobility of knowledge. Essentially, there are 3 types of distances that need to be overcome when transferring knowledge. First is physical distances. This is where immigration plays a key role, both forced and unforced immigration. Hidalgo uses several examples of forced immigration to show influence through a natural experiment, which is really a horrible way to talk about the Holocaust, but that's what he's describing it from an economic standpoint. So he's an economist here. So what a natural experiment means is that you have something that happens in the world that is driven by the events of the world, and you're able to see what happens whenever it impacts different groups of people in different similar economies. And he also talks about a young man who moved from the UK after working in arkwright mills, which is a mill that's talked about in both the Blood in the Machine and in Techno Negative, as a bad place. So it's interesting that it's being presented in a positive way. And it's a technology that's supported by the state, and there are laws to prevent people from migrating from the UK that know how to use and build these tools to other places, which is exactly what this guy did. He went from the Midlands in the UK to Connecticut. So yeah, this guy decided to take his knowledge to the UK to the US to make his own fortune. He traveled under a pseudonym and only took what he knew in his brain. He didn't take papers with him or anything like that. He moved to Rhode Island, where there were some similar failed mills, and offered his knowledge and partnership. It was so valuable, he owned half of these ventures just to make sure that these mills worked, even though somebody else put in all the capital, got all the labor, made all the contacts, had the entire network. He owned the knowledge so that he could make this happen. The second distance is relatedness, where organizations can successfully move from one type of technology into a nearby related technology. Hidalgo uses the example of aircraft manufacturers in Germany, Italy, and Japan immediately after World War II. All three countries were banned from making aircraft, so any manufacturer had to pivot out of aircraft to manufacture something new. In all three cases, the companies pivoted towards automotive, either in scooters or motorcycles. There were market niches open at the time for these companies to go into. And so the understanding how to build a plane and extrude metals and control engines and things like that made it relatively easy to move into automotive. The last type of knowledge transfer is from master to apprentice. When immigrants come to the US, the studies show that it's more likely for new knowledge to pass from senior researchers to their PhD students rather than peer-to-peer. So like Einstein, for example, came up with all of his theories. It was more the younger generation that took them on instead of his peers. The final knowledge law is economic growth comes from the complexity of product mixes and market. For policymakers, if you want to make the next Silicon Valley, it's best to pick an area already rich with many types of knowledge and pick a relatively low cost series of products to invest in while the technology is transitioning along new knowledge curves. So what this means is you pick a place, like if you're in the United States, you would pick something like Detroit, and you would say, there are new types of motorcycles being built. They're all electric, so Detroit's going to be a really good spot for that. That's exactly what Musk did, in a way, with the factory that he picked in Fremont. It was an excellently run joint venture between Toyota and GM. All the skills were still there in that area, and he was able to bring back all those people to make his cars much more quickly than he would have if he would have had to start from scratch. Hidalgo compares two attempts at generating a new Silicon Valley: Ecuador's Yache Valley, which they tried to make a remote location far from all the money and all the networks to build a university city, and they invested $1 billion into it, and it failed. And there's an area right outside of Beijing, within a short distance of multiple universities in China, that they did the same sort of thing, where they tried to create new universities and create new knowledge centers and created a free economic zone in that area so that people could start their own companies. And it worked really successfully. Researchers in the areas had already built significant knowledge using things like nuclear fusion magnets or translation cards from English to Chinese during the 286 years, which were the 286 processors that Intel made. So we're talking about the early 80s. And these translation cards, that's how Lenovo started. And so they transitioned from doing these cards to help translate, because translating from Chinese to English and back and forth was processor intensive. These were the types of things that came out of that, and that now they bought ThinkPad from IBM and all those sorts of things. These two books are interesting to me because they represent the tension I have between interest in growing, learning about new technologies and being involved in new technologies, and how new technologies can cause all sorts of problems for people I care about. I'm interested in how the economy grows and how technologies interact with it, but I'm also not a fan of capitalism. And I do not see technology as a neutral force in our society. Every new technology has a set of politics baked into it. Even whenever a company switches from making warplanes to scooters, which is Vespa, there's a political underpinning to it. It shapes the directions of countries, it shapes how food is grown, it shapes where money is invested, and what's an acceptable line of business. If you look at these two books together, you can see reasons why technology developed where and when it did. I mentioned the printing press in the Techno negative section, but Hidalgo mentioned it in his book directly. And he talks specifically about the diffusion of printing technology throughout Germany and how Gutenberg leveraged printing the Bible and letters of indulgences, which were single-page letters that people could get for making donations to receive special treatment in heaven. These letters were part of what spoke the Reformation and why Lutheranism was successful. Martin Luther used the press to fight against the church. Religion was both a tool to get state approval of the press and then to fight against the very power of the church. The technology was taken away from Gutenberg in a fight. Technology was taken from Gutenberg in a lawsuit and spread throughout Germany without him making any money from it. The technology was stolen in a similar way to get beyond Germany as the Arkwright mill, when people migrated throughout Europe to set up their own printing presses. Since it was expensive and difficult to ship books, it was cheaper to get a printing press set up and then have a local distribution for that. What I think we can look at with these two books is that despite the tensions between the two of them, I think people do enjoy new technologies. Dykeiser calls this out explicitly in his books. What people struggle with is the control they give up to the owners of the technologies. Since policies play such a strong role in Hidalgo's research, immigration policy, industrial policy, research policy, etc., I think it's fair for us to demand more control over how technologies are deployed, how economic benefits are accrued, who accrues them. Hidalgo shows very explicit government policies can build new high-tech economic regions. These regions are required to have government sanctions. They are invested directly by the government, and the profits are generally privately owned. While there is a broad regional benefit, not everything is exactly equal. There's no reason why we can't use that same benefit and say that the profits of the economic policies have to be spread back out to the people impacted by those companies. So whenever you build a factory, it's not free. It's not without negative impact on the people who live around it. That company is polluting, and the economic benefit that is coming in that area from that factory should be returned, and those companies should have to mitigate the impacts that they cause on people. If people are tossed out on the street because of the Arkwright mill and cannot compete, and the industrial policy of the day would kill anyone that broke the machine, there's ample money then to pay people a living wage and encourage them to move into a related skill. Governments can offer packages for redeveloping plants when a business leaves a community to offshore the manufacturing of something. Hidalgo would suggest the community look to move upstream of the technology that moved out of the community. So that means that if you had a steel mill and you were processing steel, and that steel mill moved out of the community, you should look into making things out of that, like automotive or building materials or things like that. So technology that moved out becomes a raw material for what you use. This is an adjacent technology where a plant could compete not with the previous company, but with suppliers for that company. This is generally how vertical integration takes place. Government policy to retrofit and leverage the knowledge of workers while they still remember how to use the machines is a really good policy. Even if it's creating space for the former employees to experiment for a few years using the same plant and equipment to make complementary things or spare parts or whatever, it can spawn other businesses as the former employees understand the business environment they're in. I get that the US is pretty far along in the line of deindustrialization, but that isn't the only place we can use these sorts of policies. I was thinking about this with my own team at work. I was thinking of the spaces in the market where we have gaps compared to various competitors. And I was thinking about how we could move either downstream or upstream, shifting left or right in the product pipeline. I realized I had plans for a bunch of things in place already. However, the adjacent markets that would probably make our products more interesting, we weren't in. So I decided to put together a bit of a skunk works to treat the viability of moving into those adjacent markets. People hate technology when it hurts them. People love learning new things. They like building things. They like getting out there and making things. If we make it safer for these new technologies to exist for people threatened by them, there will be less pushback. If we want to dump money into AR for art creation, well, then let's build a universal basic income so people can still make art without starving. People will still buy both types. There will be a customer base for the crappy AI art, and there will be a customer for the human-generated art. But because AI has undercut the value of the market so much, it's going to be difficult for those people to live. People will continue to reject technology. We should make that acceptable at all levels. We need to support alternatives, which will ultimately increase our economic complexity and will lead to growth overall. Have you read either of these books? What do you think about them? What do you think about techno negativity? What do you think about these economic laws of knowledge generation? Did I miss something? Is there something you'd like me to read? Thank you so much for spending your time with me. I really appreciate it. And I hope you have a good one. Thank you.